Out of all the Mega Man series, the classic games might just be the most consistent when it comes to quality. I mean, sure, the original is kinda janky and ill-designed at points, but it still manages to be somehow endearing. And yet there is one entry among the 11 that I really do dislike, Mega Man 5. While I remember not liking it as much when I played through the first 8 games in my teens, I don't think I was aware of just how much I hated this one until I got back to the series last year, and when I started cataloging the reasons, it became clear that it went deeper than just personal preference. I'm Wes the Explosion, and this is why I die inside every time I beat Mega Man 4, since I know what has to come next. 5 attempts to finally address the elephant in the room. What the heck is going on with Proto Man? First, he continually harasses you, other than that one time when he opens a path for you. Then he either cosplays a Sniper Joe, or a Sniper Joe cosplays him. Then he saves you instead of Wily. Then you find out it all might have been a clever ruse to fake Wily's death. Then he ruins Wily's plans by rescuing a kid, but only when his plans are already in the toilet, and then he just pieces out. Everything's your problem again. He just cleared up a plot point. By the end of 4, you can probably assume that he's a good guy, or at least not Wily's friend, though there is still plenty of room for doubt. There's so much room, in fact, that when the guy starts causing trouble with a group of 8 new robot masters and kidnaps Dr. Light, that taking the situation at face value doesn't seem too far-fetched. Or maybe I'm just too cynical. Then again, we've seen enough of Albert's shenanigans that it wouldn't be too crazy to expect some kind of ruse, and wouldn't you know it, it turns out it's another Wily plot with a robot with a very convincing Proto Man costume as the scapegoat. And even though Blues does come to your rescue, unmasking the fake, he once again doesn't stick around to help, so it's entirely possible he's helping you more as a point of pride as opposed to being a bro. But hey, like I said before, I am cynical. Oh, and the Russian guy gave the blue bomber a bird. All Rock's moves from the last game are back: jump, shoot, slide, and charge, though that last one got a bit of an upgrade. The hitbox for a full charge shot is a bit bigger, and it packs a lot more of a punch. I actually never noticed this until someone pointed it out, but once they did, yeah, it is flashier. Just about every regular enemy can be one-shot with it, and most significantly of all, it can do some actual damage to bosses. No more feeling like you'd be better off just plinking them twice than to committing to some wind-up. Rush has gone through some things. Jet still works the same as last. You jump on, he automatically moves forward with you being able to angle him up or down, and energy drains as you go. The Marine, though, is nowhere to be seen, not that you really need it in this one. The big thing is the coil, which I really don't even want to acknowledge using the same name. Before, you would summon Rush, jump on his back, and he would launch you with the spring. Now, you summon Rush, jump on his back, and the spring launches him and you have to jump off at the apex, or whenever you get around to it. While I'm sure some people like this, since you can choose when to disembark, I find it incredibly awkward. And if you're standing on the same tile as Rush when you try to hop on him, he'll just jump without you while still draining the ammo count. I don't know if someone thought Rush Coil was too powerful and needed nerfed, or if they were trying to be creative, or really wanted to separate this one from the other entries, but I feel like them taking one of the simplest and reliable tools at your disposal and making it unpleasant and hard to use is all the proof I need that 5 is a reeking piece of trash. But I'll have more examples as we go along. My current point is, Rush is horrible in this one, and I have no idea why they felt the need to change him. Moving on, Eddie and E-Tanks are back, but we also get something called an M-Tank. You can only get one at a time, and using it will refill all of your everything. I'm the type to hoard my power-ups, so I hardly ever use it, but when I went to the wiki to confirm that this is what it did, I was informed that you can use it when you're already at full health and full weapon energy to turn all basic enemies on screen into 1-ups, which is pretty darn cool. I'll give you that one, 5. Then there's 2 new powers that I was torn on whether I should include with Mega Man's abilities or with the weapons, but I figured I'd reserve the latter for just what the Robot Masters give you. You get an item called the Super Arrow, which is pretty versatile. It's a projectile that you can stand on that will latch onto walls, so you can hitch a ride on it to clear gaps, place it on a vertical surface to give yourself an extra platform, or just use it as an attack, though it does have a slow startup, so you need to plan ahead for that route. It consumes energy as it flies forward rather than each use, so you need to mind your ammo. And finally there's Beat, a little robotic blue bird that will fly at an enemy to dive bomb them if you manage to get close enough. His energy consumption is a bit better than the damage he deals, at least on the bosses that are weak to him, so you don't need to mind how you use him too much against them. Each stage has a letter that, when you get all of them, will spell out Mega Man V, or 5 if you're Roman, and unlock Beat in the process. Some are easy to just grab, some require careful jumps, one is hidden behind breakable blocks that don't show up again, and some you can easily sail past and not be able to get without a return trip. Specifically the 2 stages that I hate playing the most, so that's fun. While a bit of a pain, I always collect them because I do not want to engage with Darkman 4 and Wily Capsule on their terms. If I had to make a tier list of all the Mega Man weapons, I think the set from this game would manage to get something on every level. They're that all over the place. While there's a few good choices here, I think I'd rank Star Crash the highest. It's a shield so it can block hits for you, but it can also be fired off, and given its size, you don't really need to be too precise with your aim. Gravity Hold hits everything on screen, so despite its low ammo count, it's pretty good. Still though, given that all you have to do is press fire to use it effectively, it's not the most exciting weapon. Gyro Attack flies straight ahead, until you press up or down to change direction. It's good for hitting enemies out of your reach, and I really love how it's paired with Crystal Man as a weakness, him constantly jumping higher than you, making full use of the power's special property. On the more okay side of things, we have the Charge Kick. Slide into an enemy to deal damage. While it's not the most effective, at the same time, non-projectile attacks are rare, and it's also pretty satisfying to make an enemy take touch damage instead for a change. Water Wave travels along the ground, so it's pretty reliable for low-placed enemies. And on the border between mediocre and garbage is the Crystal Eye. Fire it out, and when it collides with a wall, it'll split into 3 smaller projectiles that bounce off walls. While not horrible in an enclosed space, at the same time, relying on the ricochets is essentially a waiting game. It's a slight upgrade to the Gemini laser, but personally, I try to just hit with the initial shot before it splits. Napalm Bomb plops out in front of you, bounces a few times, and then explodes, which is not nearly as cool or helpful as it might sound. A lot of times, I just use the Charge Mega Buster against Stone Man instead. And finally, perhaps the worst weapon in the entire series, there's the Power Stone. Sweet Christmas, if this were the first special weapon anybody ever got, it could turn them off to not only swapping powers, but the whole series in general. It is that bad. A boulder appears on either side of you and then spins outward until it goes off screen. It is incredibly inaccurate. It may be only being reliable if you're right next to the enemy when you use it. Besides that, it probably won't hit unless something walks into it, or if you're able to eyeball its trajectory, if whatever you're aiming at happens to not move by the time it reaches them. And not only that, but it's another weapon that you can only fire off one at a time, with no switching while they're out. So if you whiff a shot, you need to wait for the attack to conclude before trying again, or if you learned your lesson, swap to literally anything else. I swear I remember using this effectively against Charge Man when I originally played the game, but these days, I cannot get it to work and will not bust it out at all during a playthrough. It's not worthless, it's less than worthless, actively detrimental. 5 probably has the worst stage design in any of the mainline games, and is pretty uninspired when compared to most of the franchise in general. There are maybe 2 I like here. The 4th Darkman stage, where you shoot blocks to break them and drop the tower until the ball store is on your level, is a pretty clever gimmick, though it is really short. Then there's Gravity Man stage, which is easily the best one here. The gravity swap sections are really cool, and since they're clearly labeled, you can plan ahead to catch power-ups while switching. Not only that, but slide is now jump plus up, which is a neat touch. And while there are a few leaps of faith with spikes at the bottom, they tend to be on the side of the screen that you won't be on, so they're more there to make things seem harrowing, rather than get cheap deaths. And everything else is either pretty terrible or mediocre. There are so many stages that have little to no gimmicks, the same enemies you'll find in every other stage, and just have very basic platforming to contend with. Which I'd say is fine, it's just not memorable, and not what I've come to expect from the series. For individual callouts, in Crystal Man stage, There's these tubes that drop gems, and if you get hit, you're dead. Into the pit you go. The drop rate seems somewhat random, but it was pointed out that jumping right after they go, you can make it through. There are a lot of these right in a row though, and they only need to get you once for the KO, so it feels extremely cheap still. It's a coin flip on whether I despise that stage or Wave Man's more. Get close to cracks in the floor and steam shoots out, which will deal damage upon contact. While not really a threat on their own, they really mess up the timing for dodging the other obstacles, like the ball and chains and razor wheels. While I might be making things harder than they need to be, I still hate them. The second half of the stage is a vehicle section, which might be even worse. While you can maneuver your screen position, you're constantly moving forward, and with how narrow the screen is, getting hit with something from the left or right side is pretty easy if you lurk on the edges too much. You're back to using a pea shooter, and the sub-boss takes up a hefty chunk of the screen. And while all of this is annoying, but something you can deal with, the special letter for beat is in this part. If you're stunned from taking damage, still in the air, or just plain miss it, you have to either give up on the little guy or do the whole level again, which causes me no small amount of distress. Gyromance is fine, I guess. The falling walkways with dropping enemies and the descending platforms with the spiked ceilings aren't bad ideas, but they are unforgiving, so I could go either way on them personally. Then there's this Wily stage with the Leap of Faith, where if you jump wrong, you do not have any time to maneuver yourself, and you die. Seriously, you have no way of knowing, other than experience, where the horizontal spike sections are, and you die by no fault of your own. That's no longer a challenge, it's mean-spirited, and if whoever designed this had a smug smile watching someone try to get through this section, you'd have to hold me back from feeding them the cartridge. And then there's Starman's stage, which I almost really like. Sure, it's pretty much just a water stage with a space-themed reskin, but it's still fun to play, other than the one section. There's a lot of gaps in Mega Man where enemies leap up, and I'm a little torn on how to think on them. They never give me much trouble, since I know where all of them are, and even if I didn't, the classic series has taught me to take my time around pits of a certain size, but I imagine for the uninitiated, these can feel really cheap, like a sucker punch to their life counter. In Starman's stage though, there's a wide space with moving platforms on the other side, and a line of spiked balls underneath. Make the jump and enemies will pop out to catch you. To a degree, this could be seen as better than the pit situation since there you're dead, whereas here, you can land on the spikes and jump again before your iframes fade, so it's not an insta-death. But there's just no intuitive way to know you're about to get ambushed, so I hate it. If anyone manages to dodge this by baiting out the baddies, it's not their first go-around for sure. And in general, there's some really cheap enemy placement on this one. There are some enemies that, again, unless you know to bait them out, will catch you mid-jump from off-screen, you not being in a position to dodge. The Heli Joes fire projectiles at you, but the bigger threat is them flying into you and then continuing to teabag you. The Walker enemies will advance while firing, and if a ledge doesn't block them and you fire while retreating to take them out, it will immediately respawn when you advance again. The jumping dolphins in that vehicle section we already talked about are a problem. The chickens and floating single-eyed football-shaped foes I actually kinda like. Mets and shielders are classics. The superhero-looking Big Eye stand-in tends to make big enough jumps that you can deal with him, and the rest of the enemies are pretty forgettable. Pretty telling that unless they're a long-running baddie or something that really ticked me off, I can't be bothered to remember them. Point is, most of the game is either frustrating or boring, definitely one of the weakest showings for the Blue Bomber. If only the game could have been just Gravity Man's stage around a dozen times. Much like their weapons, the bosses are all over the place. Design-wise, I really like Charge Man, there being something whimsical about a person-train combo, and Napalm Man. Even though I think the tank treads and all the different orifices they give him to fire off explosives are a little much, his ridiculousness manages to endear him to me rather than repulse. On the other end of things, there's Crystal Man, who's just kind of a guy with some balls on his head and limbs, and even worse, Starman, a generic android that they slapped a star on his helmet and chest and called it a day. I think he's the most boring visually in the entire series. As for the rest, they're all pretty good, though they don't stand out as favorites for me. Gravity Man's upper body has a unique shape, making him seem pretty imposing. The headpiece, hose, and harpoon gun keep Waveman on theme, and that they give Gyroman helicopter landing gear for feet is pretty clever. And Stoneman looks good, but that's only because Gutsman looks good, and Stone is just Brick Gutsman. Not getting many points for originality. As for the boss encounters, none are too bad. With how powered up the charge shot is, pretty much any of them can be felled with just the Buster. Individually, Stone and Star jump around a lot, pretty high at that, so they're easy to avoid and thus not hard to take down. Though how often they'll be invulnerable can drag things out and be annoying. Water Wave gets rid of that for Starman though. Gyroman has some nice patterns, going in and out of the clouds to hide and throw out attacks, but if you use the gravity hold, it turns into a blink and you'll miss it fight. Napalm Man is a bit chaotic, throwing out a lot of stuff at you, so it's just a matter of out-damaging him, which isn't too tall of an order. I really like the fight for Crystal Man due to his weakness, which I've already talked about, and Gravity Man. While I imagined it'd get repetitive if you had to do it multiple times, him constantly swapping gravity, keeping you on opposite surfaces, and making you time your shots to hit him as he passes is a pretty cool setup. Even better when you have Star Crash, since you have to get close but not too close enough that only you hit him, and kinda testing your guts in the process. Then you get the two that are a little bullcrap, Wave and Charge. Wave makes spouts of water pop up from the floor. Might be missing something here, but it seems random. Sometimes he'll pop it up right under you, no chance to dodge. Sometimes he'll put it in your path so that you run into it, and sometimes he'll shoot it up the next zip code over. The tiny towers also block shots, so we can use them defensively as well. While a lot of the hits from this seem cheap, his leaps and harpoon are much easier to deal with, so it's just a matter of hitting him harder than he hits you. And Charge Man is probably the hardest of the 8 Robot Masters. He's invincible a lot during his fight, from when he turns red and drops coal on you, to when he stays his odd orange-pink hue and rushes you. And as you can probably guess from the rush part, he's pretty fast. If you tick off his AI, he can run into you, then just keep kind of walking on top of you so that you immediately take damage again when your iframes drop. The fight is all about keeping your distance and getting your timing right, more so than the typical pattern recognition. And he's weak to Power Stone, so you can't even use that to compensate. Despite being the roughest of these encounters, I've been starting with Charge Man just because I know I'm not going to use anything other than the Buster on him. That moves us on to the Darkmen, a series of 4 bosses for the special stages. I like how they all have some design motifs that label them as a set beyond just in name, with still having enough unique bits that you can easily tell them apart. And they look downright ominous, with their robo-brains exposed through a bit of glass and their expressionless faces, so they live up to their names. Darkman 1 rolls around on treads and can have the same issue as Chargeman, of just staying on top of you if he gets close, but since he doesn't immediately rush you, if he can stack enough damage before he speeds up, you're good. Darkman 2 has a shield and will run at you, getting faster as you deal more damage, so timing your shots to hit in between his pillars is the key to winning. And Darkman 4 is the same, just beefier, with a regular buster as well, and the ability to shoot off his shields. Darkman 3 I utterly despise. He jumps high and shoots off volleys, so he's kinda similar to Crystal Man, even having the same weakness of the gyro attack, so you'd think I'd like the fight, but what gets me is his other attack. He shoots off 3 Cheerios, and if you get caught by one, you'll be frozen in place. Unlike with, say, Bright Man though, where if you're stuck in place long enough, you'll just break free, with DM3, there is no moving until he hits you. Do you know how frustrating it is to just have to sit there, waiting to see whether he'll blink or just run into you? While I'm not sure if he's the hardest boss in the game, he's definitely the most irritating, and I typically end up cursing him out when I fight him. Moving on to the Wily Fortress bosses, they suck. The tower boss, big pets I'm told, you have to shoot his segments to make them fly out and jump up on them to get in range of the boss. He shoots off 2 little weird goobers that may or may not hit you as you attempt to do so and can only be damaged when his eyes are open. It's weak to the Crystal Eye, but given that there are no walls, you only use it as a regular shot and would either have to swap between Buster and it to use it, or waste 2 shots getting its central parts to pop out. The Circ Ring is just a big circle that moves in an upside down V. Shoot in between its flaps to deal damage. It's weak to the gyro attack, but once again, you're not using its special properties, instead just shooting it straight ahead. Might as well use your damn buster. Both are pretty easy, especially if you have an excess of E-tanks and can be a bit reckless to move things along. The Wily Presser hovers overhead and then slams down, you being able to shoot him when he does so. The boss would be neat if it were faster. As it stands, most of the fight is just you running around, trying to anticipate his movements while he just moves back and forth, and even with the small spike pit in the middle, he's pretty darn easy. The Wily machine is once again skull-themed, and while a pushover, it does get bonus points for being weak to Super Arrow, since it's not a traditional weapon. The Wily capsule isn't bad, it popping up and attacking before fading away again. Another round of whack-a-mole, and if you have Beat, you can just let him do his thing and concentrate solely on dodging. Assuming Beat isn't on his break and will actually do what he's supposed to do. While there's some good fights here, really good fights here, the crappy ones really stand out, so I can't say I'm too fond of this roster. The game definitely has some great tracks. I really love the music for the Dark Man, Charge Man, and Napalm Man stages, and Gravity Man ain't half bad either. Most of the other songs feel pretty weak though. Wave Man makes me feel lethargic, Starman sounds more like just noise, and while I do kind of like Gyro Man's, it also feels a little out of place somehow. This is definitely one of the weakest OSTs in the series, especially for NES, and while I still want to defend it and say it's leagues better above most games from that era, I also have to admit that I am extremely biased when it comes to Mega Man as a whole. The difficulty on this one is weird. I already talked about some of this game's bullcrap, from unforeseeable obstacles, to some frustrating boss patterns, to some powers that are just nigh unusable. And yet, despite all that, this one doesn't take me much longer than most of the other NES titles to beat. Part of it might just have to do with drop rates. Whenever the game is too generous with power-ups, I have to question whether there's some sort of secret easy mode and I accidentally turned it on. But when I was looking into what other people consider the easiest Mega Man title, some people nominated this one due to how many extra lives they drop. Could also have something to do with the powered-up charge shot, and I do think that plays a not insignificant part, but I think the big thing is that this game's difficulty relies mostly on being cheap, and unfortunately for it, it's a learnable kind of cheap. Sure, it might hit you with something that you can't see coming if you've never played the game before, and maybe enemies will respawn if you happen to blink, but once you've stumbled through it all once, all of a sudden you can predict the unpredictable and know when to play more aggressively as opposed to defensively. If you're going for beat, the game can still be pretty irritating if you have to revisit levels, but for everything else, things become more of a chore than a challenge. While it probably won't be fun, it's doable, if sigh-inducing. 5 really does highlight just how out of touch I am with the Mega Man community. For a while, I would dread every time I would bring this one up, since I expected to get a lot of pushback, telling me that all my issues were because I was bad at the game, but I typically get people sympathizing, if not outright agreeing with me. Then again, I haven't really gotten much flack for not worshipping at the shrine of Mega Man 2, so maybe I've just been extremely lucky. Either way, while I've gone from pretty negative on 2, 9, and 11 to really enjoying each, I still hate 5, despite completing a lot more playthroughs of this one. My last run was probably the best time I had with it being about as fun as doing some house cleaning. At this point, I doubt I'll ever come around on it. I am curious though, am I too harsh on this one? Is it just as good as the other classic titles and it's only my lack of skill that makes me feel this way? Or is this one a rare drop in quality, one not seen before or since? Any tips or insights into this one are welcome, but for now, thanks for watching and putting up with my complaints, and maybe consider subscribing if you like Mega Man content. Forever lasting peace, and we can only go up from here. At least until I move on to either other series or side games.